Welcome back, focused learners. Today, we're diving into an explainer that covers, honestly, one of the most fascinating corporate arcs in modern history. We're looking at the rise, the absolute reign, and the ongoing reckoning of Google. We're going to explore this wild journey of how a simple university research project morphed into a global tech monopoly, one that's now facing historic government scrutiny. It's a massive story of innovation, unimaginable scale, and some really intense legal battles.
To truly wrap your head around this company, I want you to picture the number 1. Now put exactly 100 zeros after it. In math, that massive number is actually called a Google, and when the founders were naming their search engine, they basically just went with a misspelling of that term. It's a fun little fact, but it brilliantly captures the sheer, almost unimaginable scale of the company we're dissecting today. They literally picked the name to signal their goal of organizing massive, seemingly infinite amounts of information on the internet.
So, here is our roadmap for today. We'll trace a really clear narrative arc, starting from their Stanford beginnings, then going public and expanding, restructuring into Alphabet, looking at some internal clashes and protests, and finally, diving deep into their antitrust reckoning.
All right, let's jump right into Chapter 1, the Stanford beginnings. Let's take a trip back to 1996. We're at Stanford University, and Larry Page and Sergey Brin are collaborating on a project they initially nicknamed BackRub. Thankfully, they changed the name, but the core technology that gave them an overwhelming advantage was called PageRank. They figured out that instead of just counting how many times a keyword appeared on a web page, which is kind of what everyone else was doing at the time, they could actually measure a page's importance by tracking its backlinks. It's exactly like academic citations. If highly relevant pages link to your page, well, your page must be relevant too. This algorithm was an absolute game changer.
Their tech was undeniably better, but get this. In early 1999, Brin and Page actually wanted to sell the company. They went to the CEO of a search portal called Excite and offered to sell Google for $1 million. He rejected it. A venture capitalist even talked Brin and Page down to $750,000, and Excite still said no. No way, right? It's a fascinating irony, and looking back, honestly one of the most expensive missed opportunities in tech history.
Okay, moving on to Chapter 2, Going Public and Expanding.
Having survived the whole dot-com bubble crash, the early 2000s were an era of explosive growth and a massive shift in Google's business model. As they were prepping for their IPO in 2004, the founders baked their early idealism right into their prospectus. They explicitly included their famous code of conduct, "Don't be evil." They genuinely presented themselves as this company that would gladly forgo short-term gains just to do good things for the world. Actually, scratch that, it goes even further back. In 1998, they had co-authored a research paper explicitly opposing advertising-funded search engines.
But, realities change. That initial anti-ad stance, it basically vanished less than a decade later when Google bought DoubleClick for a staggering $3.1 billion. This was a huge pivot. It marked the beginning of their use of HTTP cookie-based web tracking. They moved from running simple text ads to totally dominating the personalized, tracking-based advertising market that pretty much fuels the entire modern web today.
And the financial stakes of this pivot were just astronomical. When they IPO'd in 2004, they raised $1.67 billion, instantly giving the company a $23 billion market cap. This turned a ton of early employees into paper millionaires overnight. Because of this massive windfall, founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page, along with their CEO Eric Schmidt, famously asked that their base salaries be cut to exactly $1 single. Their primary compensation was now coming directly from their massive stock ownership anyway.
With all that capital flooding in, they systematically built out the Google ecosystem. And they did it fast. Google News launched in 2002. Then came Gmail in 2004. Google Maps dropped in 2005. They went straight after Microsoft by launching the Google Chrome browser in 2008. And then they made their fourth attempt at social networking with Google Plus in 2011. They weren't just a search engine anymore. They were becoming the literal infrastructure of the internet.
Which brings us to Chapter 3, Restructuring into Alphabet.
Entering the 2010s, the sheer size of the company was so vast that it required a huge corporate evolution. So, in 2015, they announced a major structural shakeup. Google basically reorganized everything and created a brand new parent holding company called Alphabet Inc. Google itself became the main subsidiary, keeping all those core internet-focused services under one roof.
Meanwhile, they separated out their more ambitious, riskier investments, what they often called their other bets, into entirely separate entities under the Alphabet umbrella.
All right, Chapter 4, Internal Clashes and Protests.
Now, as the company's global footprint really expanded in the late 2010s, we saw some deep internal frictions start to emerge. This really challenged the core of that original "don't be evil" culture. Between 2018 and 2019, tensions between Google's leadership and its workforce escalated over a few highly specific controversies. Staff internally protested Project Maven, which involved providing AI for military drones. They also pushed back hard against Dragonfly, which was a proposed censored search engine specifically for China. And finally, there was significant internal unrest regarding how the company handled sexual harassment complaints, particularly when it came to executive exit packages.
Just to put the scale of this internal clash into perspective, on November 1, 2018, more than 20,000 employees and contractors staged a massive global walkout to protest the company's handling of those harassment claims. 20,000 people! It was a staggering demonstration of how that idealistic 90s startup culture was colliding head-on with the messy realities of being a giant global corporation.
And that leads us to Chapter 5, the Antitrust Reckoning. As we roll into the 2020s, Google is facing massive, unprecedented government interventions that threaten its undisputed reign. Internationally, this pressure had been mounting for years. Case in point, in September 2024, the European Commission slapped Google and Alphabet with a mind-boggling €2.42 billion fine for an antitrust case involving their shopping service. But as huge as that was, this international fine was really just a precursor to the existential legal battles brewing back home in the United States.
The U.S. Department of Justice kicked off a serious sequence of escalating actions. Step 1 started back in 2019 and 2020 with a major lawsuit over monopoly abuse in search. Then, Step 2, by October 2024, the DOJ escalated things dramatically by proposing actual structural breakups. Step 3, a month later, they explicitly urged a federal court to force the sale of Chrome and put an end to those exclusive default deals with companies like Apple. All of this was pointing straight at Step 4, a massive remedies trial set for April 2025.
Ahead of that trial, we saw an incredibly intense legal standoff. On one side, you have the DOJ demanding extremely aggressive breakups. They want to force the sale of Chrome and completely ban those super lucrative default search placement deals. On the other side, Google is fighting tooth and nail to keep its ecosystem intact. In December 2024, they countered. They offered a narrower 3-year ban on exclusive default deals, including their long-standing arrangement with Apple, but they firmly refused to sell off Chrome or Android. Their argument? Breaking up the company would ultimately harm consumers and stifle innovation. So the trial happens, and in September 2025, Judge Amit Mehta issued a historic ruling. He actually blocked the DOJ's request to force the sale of Chrome and Android. But he struck a massive blow to Google's business model. He ruled that they could no longer include their search engine in exclusive default contracts. On top of that, he mandated that Google has to share certain search index and user interaction data with their competitors. So Google managed to avoid the ultimate corporate death penalty of a forced breakup for sure, but their most powerful distribution pipeline was completely dismantled. So how exactly did Alphabet respond to this huge hit? Well, by doubling down on the future. Bringing our timeline right up to April 2026, Alphabet announced a jaw-dropping $180 billion spending plan. That massive injection of capital is dedicated entirely to AI infrastructure. We're talking data centers, servers, and the continued aggressive development of their AI model, Gemini. They are literally pivoting the massive weight of the entire company toward artificial intelligence.
Which leaves us with this really critical final thought. Now that their exclusive search monopolies are legally banned, but with an unprecedented $180 billion flowing directly into AI development, is Google entering a brand new golden age of innovation? Or are they simply using their vast wealth to delay the inevitable end of an empire built entirely on search? It's a fascinating question, and one that is absolutely going to define the next decade of the internet. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.